Hello, everyone. Thank you, Camilo. So inspiring. I want to talk for my time about Honduras in Central America. And I'm going to presume that people know there was a coup, June 28, 2009, where Manuel Zelaya, who was starting to ally himself more with the ideas of the Bolivarian Revolution and various reforms, was overthrown. And I want to focus on talking about, I think, a couple of really important things. One is understanding the context of the coup and why the US was so interested in what would happen in this small country in Central America. Another is to understand the resistance movement, because it is and was a very interesting resistance movement that its presence shocked the oligarchy, it shocked US imperialism, and they're still going. So why is Honduras important for the United States? And what was the context of the coup? I think for one thing, of course, there's the historic fact that it has a strategic geographic location in Central America, right in the middle. It was used by the US as a military base against the Sandinistas, against the FMLN, against the guerrilla movements in Guatemala. It was used also, and still has, more than 6 military facilities owned by the US on its territory. It was also used to keep an eye on what was going on in Colombia. And this became more important when the Sandinistas came back to electoral power in Nicaragua. So all of these things have shown the US has always been interested. When the coup happened on June 28th, it also showed us that the US was not going to allow any more countries to slide even a half inch out of the neoliberal program that US has been promoting in Latin America and indeed here in the US. And this was very clear by the fact that the President Obama and his Secretary of State Hillary Clinton danced around the fact that it had been a violent and illegal military coup. And in the end, as Mrs. Clinton confessed in her book, did everything possible to extend the coup, to make sure that Zelaya did not get back into power and that the neoliberal march continued in Central America. And this is the other part that's important there is the US economic interests and the US government have a long-standing alliance with a very ruthless and violent oligarchy in Honduras. There's about 12 families that have historically controlled the country. They control the agribusiness. They are allied with foreign companies in mining, in hydroelectric projects, and mega tourism projects are their big dream on the Caribbean coast. So what we saw was on the side of neoliberalism, all of its warriors lined up together in Honduras to support the coup and to push it forward. And part of the program, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is the program that they had in Honduras was almost as if they were making Honduras a laboratory for neoliberalism in Latin America. They had programs already in place to privatize public education totally, including the national university system. They were seizing lands that belonged to the indigenous peoples in areas with hydroelectric wealth, and the lands of the indigenous Garifuna or Afro-Honduran peoples along the Caribbean coast in order to implement development and tourism plans. So this was already on their list, and when Zelaya started to put the brakes on it, even just a small amount, and to switch directions, they came down hard. They thought that this was going to be just one more coup in Honduras. It's not the first coup that's occurred in Honduras by any means. There's been at least 3 other military coups. They didn't have a constitution and elections for about 30 years. 1981 was when their constitution was written by the United States and handed to them as part of their return to democracy. So it wasn't the first coup, and all these coups had just happened. But this is the first coup where the people came out in the streets massively, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of Hondurans rose up against the coup starting an hour after it occurred. They were in the streets, and they were in the streets every single day from June 28th until the end of November. Every single day, not only in Tegucigalpa, but in the other major cities and in the countryside. They were blocking highways. In the universities, they were seizing buildings. And the demand at that time was for an end to the coup. And what's interesting about this movement is part of it was spontaneous in the sense that people were really angry. People who had not been active were really angry. But also what we could see was there had always been social movements, of course, and there had always been an organized left. Small compared to some of the other countries, but always there. So what's interesting is to see how people rose up and hit the streets. But there was a sort of a skeleton structure that occurred out of the already organized left and some of the trade unions, the campesino unions, that allowed this uprising of people to take on a structure and an organization that was able then to carry out the logistics for maintaining thousands of people in the streets. When those people have to be fed, they have to be given water, they have to be sheltered, because they're very poor people coming in from all the neighborhoods and from the communities. It allowed them to develop a structure for having mass assemblies where people would come and just argue and debate and vote on what is the program, what do we want to do. So it's really, I think, an interesting example of how movements that are rather small but disciplined, or small but, or not so small, but organized, can really play an important role when you have this kind of spontaneous upsurge amongst the people. Unfortunately, due to the hard line of the oligarchy, the military, and the US, they were not able to get the coup reversed. So by the end of 2009, they started shifting towards general resistance, not every day, but maintaining their organizations. And that's when the first debate came up very sharply inside the resistance about whether or not to go to an electoral. Some people, there were several positions. Should we just go everything to an electoral struggle and try and kick these guys out of office with elections, because there were going to be elections? Should we have an election but combine with resistance? Should we not have an election and just go with the street resistance continually? So that they formed a party, and that's the first time that there's more divisions in the resistance movement, and they went to one election and lost. And now they're facing that again in the next elections. And I think that the verdict is out on what works. They have not been able to win power through an election. They have remained in the streets, and they have remained organizing. The students have taken over the university again. They have now several months of intense struggle. And the campesinos, the indigenous communities continue to struggle, and the repression and militarization continues to grow. So in this situation, I think that the question arises, well, so what can we do to help? And I wanted to bring up that right after the coup, at the time of the coup, there were very few organizations working on Honduras or doing solidarity. At the time of the coup, there was a response. And in the US and Canada, 30 organizations of all different types, but agreed on the fact that we should oppose the coup and support the resistance, came together and formed the Honduras Solidarity Network. And that has been an experience of working with different organizations who have somewhat different viewpoints about what's the best role, and coming to certain common projects in solidarity that we can do to support and to help make some space for the people to continue their resistance, because we don't feel it's our job to organize them Far from it, we need more lessons on organizing from them. It's not our job to tell them what tactics they should follow, but it is our job to try and help open spaces, whether that's by trying to get US military and police and security aid cut off to the Honduran dictatorship, whether that's pressuring our Congress people on that issue, whether it's holding protests at the consulates and the embassies in the US and Canada, whether it's hitting the corporations who are in charge of the mining and hydroelectric projects, whether it's hitting USAID and the World Bank for their funding of the dictatorship, in fact. So those are the different kinds of actions we've tried to find in common, even given that not everyone agrees on everything in the network, but we've tried to focus. So right now, I think right there it is, in fact. One of the joint projects we have going on right now that we've been pushing very hard at the request of the indigenous organization COPIN, the Civic Council of Indigenous People of Honduras, which was Berta Cáceres' organization. She was murdered 1 year ago for her fearless leadership in the resistance and in the indigenous movements. So we are working hard to get Congress people to sign on to cutting off all US military and police aid. And it's not that we think that's likely to happen, but it has really helped to raise the profile of the fact that the US is funding death and destruction of a country in its entirety. So I would ask you all, if your Congress rep hasn't supported it, tell them they need to do so. And if you're interested, there was a slide, but you can also see me, and there's some flyers on the tables. If your organizations would like to do anything in support of Honduras in the continuing resistance, please get in touch with us. Thank you.